one trash can.
I move it over there, and every
You read
time
the
I come
book?
back, it's over there.
You
so-
read the book?
Done.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
Done. Both of them.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pretty, you're on.
I'm on. Thank you. Good evening, Council President, Council members. I'm Preeti Sridhar, Deputy Public Affairs Administrator. And it's my pleasure to also introduce Doug Levy to you. Doug is our lobbyist who works 27 hours a day, if it's possible, to make sure that all of Renton's priorities are kept front and center in the legislature, and always brings to us updates as they come up, and gives us a lot of counsel and advises us as we go forward. So I'll run through as briefly as succinctly as I can our 2015 legislative priorities, and then have Doug share with us more insight on what we can expect this coming session, and then also talk about, outside of our top level priorities, a lot of areas where we play a strong role, where when there are either bills or specific areas we have strong support, or we oppose legislation that is contrary to the best for the city. As we've done before, and as we did with a lot of emphasis last year, transportation. We really, really need the legislature to enact and adopt a comprehensive transportation package. For us, this is very, very critical, very important. I just asked Doug, how long did it take you to come here? And he said an hour and 15 minutes. So he basically spent the last hour and 15 minutes on 405. So we know that it's one of the worst projects, and we do need to have the worst fixed first. And it's 405, and it's the 167 interchange. And we do want that element to be emphasized, to be prioritized as they're determining projects, and to keep the funding that is already set aside for 405 and keep the savings, right at 405. We also want to have local control, and so as there are new taxes and revenue sources that are identified, we want to make sure that we have distribution of those to local, for our local transportation needs, and cities and counties get their share. And then, of course, we are strong proponents of programs such as the TIB, Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board, other grant programs, and Complete Streets, so that once again we can make the needed improvements and enhance our own local transportation infrastructure. Then we come to fiscal stability. We need to protect, with the state, our share of the revenues, and make sure that there are not funding cuts, especially those that impact public safety. And we want to have local authority and local tools so that we can address the needs that are critical for our city. Last session, we worked very hard to see if we could get the liquor excise tax distributions restored. We had 50% success, and we also had the second element of that, which was to restore the growth in liquor profits that would come back to the community. So this continues to be an area that we want to emphasize. Again, the impact is direct on public safety. It's when we went to the state, we were able to show the increase in calls for service and thefts, directly as a result of the privatization, and how the local communities need that funding. Another area, and there are several other cities, including AWC, that's taking a fairly strong role with this one. This is related to the sustainability of our revenue options, and specifically we want to look at a fix if possible. We want to encourage a fix on the limit that the state imposes on property tax growth, because we've seen year after year that our costs increase at the rate of inflation, but our revenue sources are curtailed. So we're going to play a role to strongly support other jurisdictions and combine together to look for a sustainable revenue option. And then once again, we want local authority. We want to be able to have control over our costs. This goes back to things we've said over and over again. Please don't have unfunded mandates. City governments need to be strong and viable. Public safety, we want to make sure that we have funding and tools so that, we can provide the public safety services that is expected of us. One of the big things here is, the impact of marijuana. We talk about, and last time as well when we went to the state, Doug has a letter from the Attorney General's office which states clearly what's expected, from the state and from cities in order for this legislation, to be as, to offer the freedom that this legislation offers. But then where are the revenues for that? The cities, the police are expected to make sure that this is followed. We should get a share of the revenues that, and the excise taxes.
Pretty, along that line is, one of the big extra costs to law enforcement on these issues is that they now have to get a search warrant to take blood at a major accident, or to take blood if it's a marijuana DWI. And then I just found out this evening when talking to one of the officers that there's a new court ruling that says then they had to get a second search warrant to test it.
Really?
Yeah, so this case was thrown out because nobody knew they had to get a search warrant to test it. They got the search warrant to draw the blood,
Wow.
I think that would.
but they didn't get a search warrant to test it. And those are the things that are very time consuming, and the officer told me, he says, because of those new requirements, he figures about 6 hours to finally do all the paperwork and process the DWI. So those are things that really drive law enforcement costs up.
That's too bad.
And the marijuana law is for driving under the influence of marijuana is going to be very, very expensive for us to enforce. So this is a major issue in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we've talked about this again, talking about the marijuana issue. We still have those different sets of regulations. There hasn't been a reconciliation between the retail and the medical. And we strongly support that, that is determined so that, it's equitable and they're not two sets of rules that are operating not necessarily, along each other. Other areas of public safety, we hear over and over again that there's a significant backlog in terms of training. So we want the funding to be enhanced for the Law Enforcement Academy. We do want the $2 million in the operating budget for programs such as the Alive and Free program that, we did get some funding for, thanks to Representative Pettigrew last time. And then we want critical funding for, E911 programs and sex offender address verification monies, because all this is very important for the safety in our community.
Brady, again, I guess this is an area of concern to me. Way back when they first started putting traffic enforcement penalties on every ticket that was written, that money was meant to train law enforcement officers. And over the years, they siphoned that money to training just everybody else and a lot of other things without adding the revenue. So now it's shortening the number of law enforcement basic law enforcement classes, and it's harder for us to get them into the classes. Therefore, there's going to be this. And I know the State Patrol and Seattle PD are expecting over 300 vacancies in the next couple years. Well, the State Patrol doesn't go through the Basic Law Enforcement Academy. That just gives you an idea of what every department in the state is facing because of the Vietnam era. People are all getting into the retirement age and they can retire. So there again, I think this is a very, very important issue.
Absolutely. Quality of life, and this is an area that you'll see every year we look at something that is very, very critically important to Renton, where we look for potential investments or policies that make a direct and significant change to Renton. A couple years ago, we got funding from the state capital budget for the Riverview Park Bridge. This year, we have made a strong ask, and this is not going, there it is, for the Sunset area, for the Sunset Area Park. Leslie, who's with us here, has done an excellent job of putting together a wonderful package. It's both in the governor's budget as well as a strong ask from the state for their capital budget, because this just ties in the entire investment of the Sunset Area Revitalization Program. The park is like the central piece, and what the park will achieve in terms of multiple goals, from public safety to health, to bringing the community together, to addressing the needs of an area where we've got so much diversity. We think it's a really strong project, and not to mention the fact that there's so much investment that the city's already made, and collectively, if we look at the overall investment in the area with our other partners, it'd be a total of $48 million of investment. So from our perspective, this is a very, very strong need and a strong proposal, and we hope to have success with the capital budget from our perspective. Now, Doug will tell you the other side of what the reality in Olympia might be, but this is like I said, we put forward a very strong case. We've had most of our legislators come and actually tour the area and give them a sense of what they can expect. So that's kind of our agenda at the bigger, broader, like I said, 10,000-foot level. And I'll now turn it to Doug to share with you more about what he sees, the writing on the wall and between the lines, what he's reading, and also specifically other areas where we may not have it at our top level of priorities, but where we really work hard to support and take a stand against if we need to. So, any questions before we proceed? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Preeti. Good evening, council members. I think just filling out what you've heard from Preeti in terms of our recommended list of top priorities, I would point to a few areas where I think, this is going to be a very challenging coming 2015 session of the legislature. First of all, it's a longer session of the legislature, so it's programmed as a 105-day session. In reality, given some of the clashing philosophies in Olympia, I think it could be much more than 105 days. A lot of the staff are getting internal memos saying you probably ought not make plans before July 1. So that's never a good thing if you're thinking the session's supposed to end on April 28th or so. This is going to be, obviously, we've talked a lot over the past several years about the financial crunch the legislature has been in due to a recession. Now that the state is climbing out of the recession, the new financial crunch is the court order and, in fact, the contempt order that the legislature is under on what's known as the McCleary case, the K through 12 funding obligations. As if that weren't tough enough for the legislature, there's Initiative 1351 that just passed narrowly with the voters. And what that essentially does is say that, hey, legislature, that K through 3, kindergarten through 3 class size obligation you were trying to deal with, extend that to grades 4 through 12, extend it to staff support costs. It would project to bringing 25,000 new teachers and support staff online at school districts all over the state. So a big question of whether the legislature will be able to fund all of that. McCleary, their own caseloads and general fund needs, and 1351 on top of that. I guess if I were taking that to Vegas, I'd say the odds of the state being able to do both McCleary and 1351 are not great. So that, of course, puts enormous pressure on all the other revenue streams in the general fund. And we'll obviously do our best to hold on to the state shared revenues that you have in areas like liquor and criminal justice, to fight for some of them to be restored. It'll be a tough road to hoe. I think maybe the area where we have the most promise is that we're still in the new throes of this Initiative 502 world, and the state hasn't booked new revenues from marijuana. And so that's anticipated at about $60 million over the next biennium. We'll be fighting for cities and counties to have a percentage share of that, for some of the very reasons that Councilmember Person points to. There are known costs that law enforcement's going to bear. The state is going to depend heavily on local law enforcement to make the system work. To us, it seems unconscionable to not share some of that revenue downstream. The other fish or cut bait issue for the legislature in 2015 that we'll be right in the thick of is transportation. I say fish or cut bait because, as you all know, in recent weeks, the Puget Sound Regional Council has sort of laid down the gauntlet and formed a subcommittee and said, if the Washington State Legislature isn't going to do what it needs to do on transportation and congestion and mobility, we'll investigate what we need to do to take something to our voters in the region. I think that may be helpful in prompting the legislature, frankly. There are a number of legislators that want to get a transportation package done. We'll have some of our area members literally on the front lines of that. Representative Judy Cliburn is the chair of the House Transportation Committee. Senator Litzo is on the Senate Transportation Committee. I think Councilmember Person has a point.
Councilman Prince has a question.
Yes.
I know that there had been some talk in the not too distant past about a special session dealing with transportation. Is that on the table? Is that off the table?
I'd say it's almost certainly off the table. I think at this point, the legislature assumes they kind of need to do this before the governor calls them in to do it, and there are a lot of active talks in the state Senate. So we'll see transportation be a major issue. I think there's a lot of support around 405 and getting that done for obvious reasons. We need to emphasize getting it done early in any construction schedule if a package is going to be passed. We had a meeting with the city of Bellevue just very recently. We want to make sure there's a whole coalition of folks up and down the corridor working on those issues. Let me back up to something Preeti said around the operating budget, and I shared with you that it's going to be tough to hold on to or get funds restored in the general fund. So one of the things you are going to hear cities and counties talk more to the legislature about is, if you're not going to be able to do what you need to do inside these state shared revenue silos, help us with tools, help us with authority. Give, for example, councils like this one the ability to at least have a match between your property tax revenue growth and your property tax driven costs. And so we'll see that on the table more and more in the coming session, and we've obviously built that in. The sunset request that Preeti described obviously would be in the capital budget. Among the three budgets the legislature's dealing with, that may be the most rational one, in that the state knows it will be doing a 2-year capital budget. Though there are pressures on the capital budget from the operating side, it is, I think, a more sure thing that the state will set aside a couple of $2 billion in debt capacity to do things on capital investment side. But before anybody starts to do a jig, I guess the reality check on the capital budget is, just inside the state apparatus, the governor's office has fielded $6 billion worth of capital requests from the agencies for those $2 billion in capacity that I just referenced. So that's not counting anything we bring to the legislature as locals. So a lot of demands on the capital budget, much more in the way of demands than they'll be able to fund, so it'll be very competitive. I'm biased, but I happen to think that what the city is bringing to our delegation in terms of the sunset area is a game changer. I mean, it's not often that you have an investment in terms of parks and open space infrastructure that kind of galvanizes what will happen to an entire area. You're also bringing front-loaded acquisition costs for that area. You're also showing the legislature that you and a number of other partners like the school district and the library and others have invested in that area. So you're not just asking for a handout. So we feel good about that ask. Obviously, a lot of challenges in terms of the amount of requesters that are out there on the capital side. The other thing I would say is that there will be some other issues brought into the fray, not necessarily front and center for us, but we need to watch them and they may affect the overall tally. For instance, as you may have been reading about, the governor is probably going to try and push the envelope on things he thinks needs to happen on the climate change side. There is a chance the governor will, by executive action, start a rulemaking on a low carbon fuel standard. I think there will be a lot of members, particularly in the state Senate, who will recoil at that, and we'll see what happens. The governor is going to roll out his proposed operating, capital, and transportation budgets to the legislature probably on or about December 18th. Remember that under the state constitution, the governor is obligated to send those budgets to the legislature. Remember too, on the operating budget, he's required by the Constitution to do what's called a Book One budget, meaning show the legislature how within current laws, current revenue streams, he would balance. So you'll see what's called a Book One budget that I think will not be real good news for us with all our local revenues and won't be good news for anybody. And then you'll see what's called a Book Two budget where the governor says if there were new revenues, if there were some tax incentive programs that were suspended or repealed, here's what I would do with that additional money to buy back some of the cuts you saw in that other budget.
Doug,
So that'll be a major issue. Yes, sir.
any idea when Book 2 might come out?
We think December 18th. That's what we're
So
being
Book
told by
1 and
Governor's
Book
office
2,
staff.
same time?
We think we'll see both, yes. I'd say the one other factor, and again, you have a piece of this, but maybe we won't be center stage. I think we'll see a lot of discussion, debate in the legislature around what, if any, jurisdiction and role the state can have on the increasing movement of oil and coal trains. Councilmember Palmer, I think, has heard a number of presentations as a member of the South County Area Transportation Board. Remember that the state has pretty limited ability to regulate interstate traffic on the railroads. There's something called the Interstate Commerce Act, but where there are crossings, where there are stops, the state does have some ability to put safety requirements into play. You know, to what level, should there be new fees or taxes to pay for that? We'll see that debated, I think, between the House and Senate. The last thing I will mention to you, and then we'll take any questions you may have, is we're going to see quite a few new faces in the legislature. I was just, chatting with that council member up there who's previously been a legislative staffer, and, we were reminiscing about the days when maybe the legislature had a 49-49 tie. It won't be that, but it will be a 51-47 divide in the House. It's been a long time since it's been that closely divided. In the Senate, what was a 26-23 majority for what's called the Majority Coalition Caucus is still a 26-23 majority, but now 25 of those 26 are Republican members. So it's, I think, what some would call a purer majority than before when it was two Democrats crossing over. So a closely divided legislature will mean that we'll see a lot of tussles on tax policy and on the right way to do a budget and on the right groups to do a budget for. You've been approached, I think Councilmember Taylor and others have gotten a letter from groups who feel very strongly about funding for youth and homelessness prevention. Clearly that'll be up to you as a council to decide how assertively you want that stated in your agenda document. We do have it stated, we think, but Whether you want to state that more actively and assertively, we assume you'll tell us in the next week between the proposed document we've given you and the final one. I should say too, on the support opposed stuff, we'll take any questions you may have on that. What we try and do there is kind of lay out things where we can be joining others, but they're not so front and center for Renton or such a major impact for us that we think they're sort of front page worthy. But again, this needs to be your agenda, and if you want things moved around, that's your discretion to make that call.
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that, Doug. That gives me a segue to talk about this. All of you have received information. I've copied you all on the communications that I've had with the Mockingbird Society. You all know that I served on the King County Committee and Homelessness Governing Board for the past 6 years, and that youth homelessness is a major issue in not only our county, but in our city and surrounding cities as well. And although we have language that certainly points towards an interest in supporting this initiative, I think that we could really make a statement, just as the Committee to End Homelessness has done by adopting this into our legislative agenda. And they have a specific ask, which is for us to adopt and support the Homeless Youth Act, which spells out all of the various issues that are impacting homeless youth aging out of foster, etc. So I don't want to go into all of it right now, but I think you have ample and sufficient information. Would like for you to... How's that? Would like for you to take a look at it, and as Doug mentioned, consider it. We can come back and have some more discussion if you have more questions. We did invite the people from the Mockingbird Society to attend tonight's meeting. Jim Theopolis, the executive director, couldn't make it. Erin Hathaway couldn't make it. She's not a spokesman, by the way, so we do anticipate they would be coming at a future time to give us more information, elucidate on it, and help us to understand more in depth of what it means to our county and to their organization and to our youth.
Mr. Taylor, what's the cost of this? Do you know?
The cost of supporting...
Well, if these 3 acts are passed, what does it cost to the taxpayers?
I think that would be a question that we would want to pose towards the people who would sufficiently provide us all of the information.
Oh, okay, I
think that for starters, what we can do is just read through, what they're asking us, all of the information. The phone number is there as well. You can contact Erin, and she could specifically provide that information. I could even send her an email and request it. She does break down the fiscal note to all of this and send it to all of us.
That would be great.
I did want to just share with you that earlier in the year, Terry Higashiyama and Karen Bergsvik actually met with the members from the Mockingbird Society and to actually discuss having a youth homelessness summit here in Renton. They haven't heard back, but we'll be following up and continuing those discussions. I mean, in addition to the legislative agenda, to really see how we can address the issue, especially for those impacted in Renton.
Well, and I know that both Congressman Reichert and Congressman Smith had a roundtable this past summer, and homeless youth was in large part of that conference down at the Renton Community Center back in August.
Right.
So they're even looking at some federal fixes that can be done.
Mr. Chair, Council President, I just to echo, I think as you all know, this fits really nicely into some of those 4 priority areas that we've talked about before in terms of serving our vulnerable and homeless populations. We actually have those as one of our priorities. So supporting the efforts by other groups, I think, is something that the administration at least anticipates doing to the extent that you want us to do that. I think we're certainly supportive of the idea. Whether these are the right elements or not, the group has really worked, and as you can see from their correspondence, they've identified leads on each one of these 4 areas that they tend to approach. So we can work with them to try to get more information regarding, as Councilman Taylor said, fiscal notes and other things, so you know exactly what they're anticipating doing.
I think this is a good idea to support this. However, my concern is, I would rather give us the option of doing it in a broader form than saying this, because we could have 50 different agencies in here saying support our agenda and a specific, so while I support this, maybe more, the wording would not be as strong as people would like, but I'm more than willing to have that discussion as we go down the line, setting our legislative priority. And, go ahead, Marcy.
This is a different topic. I don't want to cut
Okay.
that one off. Just your take on Sound Transit voting unanimously to go to the legislature for quite the ask. How do you think that's going to affect?
Yeah, I should have mentioned, Councilmember Palmer, I think that will be a big issue, and what was a discussion in the last couple sessions about local transportation funding options just turned into a bigger discussion. And so
Yes.
the legislature is going to need to understand if local communities are asking for local options, and we will be, how do those distinguish themselves? Obviously, Sound Transit's got something that would look at a combination property tax, motor vehicle excise tax, sales tax. In past years,
Yes.
the local options package for cities and counties contemplated a motor vehicle excise tax option to be taken to the voters. My educated guess would be that no longer would be doable. So
That's
the
my
ST3
worry.
issue affects, I guess, the robustness of other local option requests. And Sound Transit's a little bit like Notre Dame football. I mean, there's lots of supporters and lots of detractors, so never a dull moment when you're debating Sound Transit policy in Olympia.
Oh, yes.
I guess the other issue, and I think it's covered most likely in the law enforcement arena, but one of the problems that we're having, and I think all the cities across the state are having, is with the State Liquor Control Board. When it comes to renewal of liquor licenses of problem businesses like we've had, where we document what it is, and the Liquor Control Board doesn't pay attention, basically. I would like to see some wordage somewhere along the line and giving some local control in revocation and renewal of liquor licenses, so that, we send our letter down saying, don't renew this license because we've had 5 shootings and all this, and it's in a residential neighborhood, it doesn't fit the character, and the liquor board just forgets about it, doesn't pay any attention. So I would really like us to have emphasis and see how we can work with other agencies. I did talk to Mayor Murray very shortly at a transportation and expressed this concern, and Seattle has the same concern.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to see somehow how we can get all the cities working together on that.
Let us take that one back. I know there's definitely a frustration that the mayor has echoed, and I know that the city has tried to, frankly, go about as far as it can through some of the business licensing requirements. And so the question is, is that enough? Is there more that needs to be done on a state level? That's been a tough one to make headway in. There's been a few efforts over the years to get more local control over the licensing process. Not easy to do, but let us take that one back and see if we can integrate something.
And I don't see it as part of the original licensing as much as I think as if you can document that you got a problem, that we should be able to have some influence on non-renewal of the licenses. I mean, I don't want to take over the state's business of who gets a license and who doesn't, and then also along the same line, so that they just can't do a sham transfer of ownership.
Yes.
So those are the things that I'm concerned about. Mr. Prince, anything?
You heard
Randy?
what I was gonna say?
No, good discussion, good.
Armando?
All good.
Okay. Well, everybody's had their chance to have their input, so I think you've gotten input to where the council would like to go. So with that, the committee of the whole is adjourned.
That more than half the stuff that ends up in the landfill is